Tell them about the time we faced two.
All right. Well, as I remember.
At Avenger headquarters.
Because united, the Avengers are strong.
Welcome to the Marvel Evolution Show with myself, Andy Stead.
And I'm Jarian Gibson.
I'm Alex Stroud.
We are being welcomed and joined today by Matt and Steve Bird from the Marvel Reread podcast. How are you, Steve? First of all, how are you, Steve?
I'm doing pretty well today. Thank you very much.
No problem. And Matt, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Superb. So we're going to get chatting to you guys very, very shortly and about what you do and why we invited you on and your great podcast and your sort of love and passion for comics and Marvel stuff. But before we get started, Jarian, how are you, my friend?
Doing good. Happy to be back for another week. You know, we had a fun chat last week about Quantumania, and happy to talk to Matt and Steve this week. Yeah,
that Quantumania discussion was really cool, and it's kicked off some really great stuff in the group. There's been some really great theories about, things like, Young Avengers and the Quantum Realm and incursions and all sorts of different things have been floating around the group this week. And I think somebody said it. One of us quoted it. It was a great way to kick off Phase 5. So yeah, that was a great conversation. Alex, how are you?
I'm good. I'm also been reminiscing about Quantumania all week. Been thinking about that movie a lot. It's definitely set off a lot of good discussions, like you said, and definitely been making me rethink how I thought the path of Phase 5 might go.
Yeah, definitely. I exactly actually the same. You sort of you think you have an idea of what's going to happen, and then obviously you then see a project, and then you're like, okay, maybe that's not what it is, and now we're thinking it's going to be something completely different. So yeah, that's been really great. So guys, as always, if you're watching, if you're listening live, please drop us a comment and say hello. Remember, chuck your initials on the end of any comments just to make sure that we know who you are. And if you've got any questions for myself, Jarian or Alex, as normal, then please drop them in. Or if you've got anything for Steve and Matt as we go through today's show, please drop them a question as well, and they'll do their best to answer it as well. So without any further ado, we've got Steve and Matt from the Marvel Reread podcast. I came across these guys in another group, and I checked out their podcast and listened to a little bit of what they were doing and reached out to them and said, look, we'd love to have you on and to talk about Marvel Comics and what you do and where you're at. So guys, it's great to have you on. I mean, who wants to sort of introduce the two of you and what you do?
Well, Matt, why don't you introduce yourself, then I'll introduce me.
Okay, everybody. Hi, my name's Matt. I am a longtime Marvel Comics fan and love you guys' show. I've been, since you guys have invited us on, I've been listening to your episodes. I realized we're not going to talk about modern day stuff today, but I went ahead, I made sure I had seen Quantumania in case it came up, and I really enjoyed it. And was expecting very, very little because of the reviews, but I was very pleasantly surprised. I disagree with the reviews. I like that movie a lot. I am the author of several books, including The Secrets of Story and The Secrets of Character. I also have a podcast called The Secrets of Story Podcast, but I decided I wanted to be a 2-podcast dude. So I went ahead and started a second podcast with my brother Steve to talk about the early days of Marvel Comics. So that is Steve. Steve, yes. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Steve Bird. I have worked in the comics industry before. I started inking for the big guys starting around 1999 or 2000, and I guess it was around 2000. And so I've mainly done work for the so-called distinguished competition, but rather than Marvel. But so I've done that. I also am self-employed in several different careers at once. I run a laser department at a makerspace. I teach software. I do all sorts of stuff. But both Matt and I had started independently going back and reading the old Silver Age of Marvel Comics from issue 1 in order. And so since we've both been doing it for a while, we both decided to go back and start over again and discuss it with ourselves and the world.
So that's obviously a huge. How far are you going to go? Are you just going to keep going? I mean, there's obviously millions of issues.
I mean, the thing is, when we start getting more than 8, I mean, we're going to start getting more than 8 issues a month soon. So when we went up to 8 issues a month, we started having to break each month into 2. So Lord only knows, especially since I'm never been diagnosed as such, but I am probably pretty severely dyslexic, and so I'm not the fastest reader. So I don't know. I'm not sure how far we're going to go. We're just having fun with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we've got,
exactly.
we've got
Sorry, Matt, go for it.
So they go up. They're going to stay at 8 superhero books a month. We're currently on March 1965, and I think it goes up until about March 1968 or so when they go up to more than 8 superhero books a month. So we've got a long time to go, and we've got that iceberg waiting for us in the future. But we continue to plow ahead for another couple years before we get there.
I thought it went up to 10 books by 66, but we'll see. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
So a question I've been dying to ask: what was the driver for this idea, for this reread idea? I mean, it's a huge undertaking.
You eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? So, if you go and say, I am going to read every Marvel comic in order from, November 1961 through to the present day, yeah, that's going to be overwhelming. But as it is, it's just like, let me just go back and see what it was like in those first, couple of years. And let's just see what it would have been like to be a kid just picking this stuff up off the newsstand and seeing this stuff in the context and the order in which it originally appeared. And I've always been somebody who likes to go back to the original source. I remember when the movie Lost Boys came out, and I'm dating myself, that was when I was in high school, they had a cover of People Are Strange that was performed by Echo and the Bunnymen. That was one of the main songs in that. And after that, a friend of mine, I said, oh, well, I should go back and get familiar with the Doors, who originally recorded this song. And then another friend of mine is like, dude, I went out and got into Echo and the Bunnymen. What are you talking about? So that's always been me to some extent.
Yeah,
Fair
I mean, it's fine. We talked about doing just like an MCU podcast because we're also big MCU fans. And then we're like, yeah, but we're just like MCU, geeks, and we could just geek out over the MCU and how much we love it. But we thought the fun thing about doing the early days of Marvel Comics is that we love it, but it's also not entirely great. And we thought that would be a more fun podcast to talk about how much we love it. And we love these comics, but we also wanted to talk about how silly the comics are and, and get some fun out of it. And
yeah, sure.
Yeah,
so,
and as I've said, how uneven it is. How, there really is some bad stuff in those early days, but they just throw enough stuff at the wall, and then just whatever sticks, they keep on moving towards that. And that's part of the beauty of it, really. Because if you started out saying, I'm going to start creating the intellectual property that will end up supporting billion-dollar movies in 60 years. Again, you eat the elephant one bite at a time. You don't do that, right? And so the fact that there was this was low-stakes stuff for them, and that's one of the reasons why it was able to grow into what it was.
Yeah, sure. We've got a couple of people listening live. I think that's Sebastian. How you doing, Sebastian? I know we've got RMC on there as well. And there is a little comment that's just dropped in there.
Yeah, let me put this up here on the screen. I would dare say there's less people doing what you guys are doing. Also, I think it's great. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know Matt said there about an MCU podcast, and here you are on a. I would say we're a predominantly MCU podcast. We do talk about lots of different things. We talk about DC and Star Wars and the boys and all sorts of different bits, and not only the MCU part of Marvel as well. We talk about comics and collectibles and cartoons. We've just done 2 or 3 episodes recently on just cartoons. But the point is, I absolutely agree with that person there. What they said is that I don't imagine there's many people doing what you're doing. I don't imagine there's many people going back.
There's 2 others at least.
There's a couple others, and we did not. There's so many podcasts out there, and we tried to Google around to see if anybody else was doing it, and we couldn't find any evidence they were. It turns out there's a podcast that is quite successful called Marvel by the Month that does the exact same thing we do. But we have differentiated ourselves from them by going a little more in depth. They do. They just devote 1 minute to most of the issues that they cover, and they have a little shot clock where they're like, okay, we've already spent more than a minute discussing this issue. Now we have to move on, and we devote about 15 minutes to every issue. So that's Yes, it does let us. I just saw it on the chat. It says it must let you really appreciate the great issues when they come along. That is so true. When we get to a really great issue, we had probably, if you guys want to check out the show and you're like, well, I'm not sure I want to listen to all 52 episodes of the show, then if I would say just the one episode you should listen to, and I should look up what number episode it is. I think it was episode number 48 or so. But if
is this the
I will
annuals
double-check
issue?
this.
Is this the
Yeah,
annuals episode?
The episode that we did with Steve Bunch was our guest, who was an old Marvel insider, and he and DC insider, and we had him on not to talk about the regular monthly Marvel comics. We had him on to talk about the two annuals from 1964, which was Fantastic Four Annual number 2 with the origin of Doctor Doom, and Spider-Man Annual number 1 introducing the Sinister Six, and that is our best episode. And but in response to the Twitter thing, like, you must be so happy when you get to the really good issues. Yes, that is so true. And like, to get to that episode with two of the all-time great Marvel comics that we got to discuss in one episode, I was so glad that we had our guest on for that episode. We recently had a guest, Rob Salkowitz, who is the comics editor for Forbes magazine, and we had him on just to discuss a random month, and it turned out to be like a horrible month. He was like, well, I figured at least the Lee Ditko Spider-Man book would be good. No, it's one of the only bad Lee Ditko Spider-Man stories, and
not a lot of them exist, I should imagine.
Right.
No.
Yeah, and yeah, it just happened to be that, like, pretty much almost every book had a low point. Well, either that or at least one of us disliked it. I actually really liked Fantastic Four that month, but Rob didn't.
I was saying a little while ago, wasn't I, to you guys? I think this was maybe last year. Fantastic Four has always been something that I've struggled to get into myself, especially the older stuff. And looking at and listening to some of the stuff that you guys have been putting up, and like you said, it's a bit silly, isn't it? Some of it is silly. It's
like
not,
when they had to hitchhike across the country to go and make a movie for the Submariner.
Where did they come up with these ideas? But then again, it was the 60s, so But yeah,
it was episode 43. If you just check out one episode of the show, November 2022, episode 43 is the best intro to our show, because we're just talking about two really great comics with a really great guest. But if you want to go hardcore, then listen to, you got it. I listen to podcasts from the beginning. I discover a new podcast. I'm like, okay, I'm going to listen to all 53 hours of this from the beginning. So, that's me.
So I've recently, my children are now, they're a little bit older now. They're in their teens, and they're starting, both boys, they're both a little bit silly, and, teenage boys, what teenage boys can be like. So they started getting into South Park and picking up bits of South Park. And then the other day they said, should we watch it from the beginning? And I was like, there's 24 seasons of this thing that date back to like the mid-90s. It's going to take forever. And funnily enough, we actually just started it tonight. I mean, watched a couple of funny episodes that I remember picking up on the past. And tonight we watched the first 2 episodes, and they watched it and they were like, what's this? I mean, it's recognizable because the characters are the same, but it's so different from what South Park is. I mean, even what it was 10 years ago. It's completely different.
Funny thing, we are. My family has tickets to go see the touring show of Book of Mormon tonight, and I'm going to be doing that right after we get off of this. And so to prepare my daughter for this, we went ahead and pulled up the South Park Mormon episode.
Yeah,
my all-time favorite episode of that show.
Yes, quite good.
So from the chat here, we have someone doing the same thing with the rewatch, and they're currently on season 26 of South Park.
Season 26 of South Park. That's nearly up to date, isn't it? I think it's season 28 or something at the moment. I'm not sure, but yeah, that's a big undertaking. However, they're only 22 minutes long. We worked out that it would take, if you watched it flat out, it would take you about 4.5 days, just flat out for 4.5 days, just South Park 4.5 days. That's got to be some sort of world record. But anyway, bringing it back to the Marvel comics and bringing it back to something, we can laugh and joke all day, but something that we've often talked about is how unrelatable those early days comics are to now. And how a lot of those stories, like, can we even translate? So let's say the MCU, for example, can we translate those stories into the modern
100%.
world?
that's one of the things that we keep on running into is the things that are taken, the threads that are taken from these early issues and woven into the Marvel Comics universe. One thing that I didn't even realize when I first read it, but then when Matt and I were discussing it on the podcast, I suddenly realized that the episode with I think it was the one with the origin of the Mandarin, or maybe it was the one that led up to the origin of the Mandarin. But one way or the other, they took basically that issue, and that was the first act of Iron Man 3. I mean, pretty much straight up. And there are a lot of different things like that. If you are a good enough writer, you can take some of this stuff that seems so out of touch with today's reality and, just take a different twist on it, and you can really make it new and make it real.
I mean, I think that Stan Lee is one of the all-time great writers, and I think that Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko are also two of the all-time great writers and two of the all-time great artists. And it's amazing how often they take stuff whole hog. Like, I mean, well, Iron Man was Stan Lee and Don Heck, and the first Iron Man movie, or at least the first 45 minutes of the first Iron Man movie, are just exactly beat for beat the first issue of Iron Man. They had to change very, very little. The Doctor Strange movie is just exactly the origin issue of Doctor Strange, which was, I think, the fourth appearance of Doctor Strange. And they are just, it's amazing how much of, especially phases 1 through 3 of the MCU, were taken very, very faithfully from Stan, Jack, Steve, Don comics. You can show off your shirt there, Steve. You can stand up and show off your shirt.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's a great shirt.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually designed it. I put it up on T Fury. No, not T Fury. What is it? Redbubble. So,
and but it's amazing. Just they were creating this IP that, as Steve was saying, they were not trying to create billion-dollar IP. They were, it's funny, every time they'll have an issue where they're like, hey, Marvel fans, you're going to want to buy 2 copies of this issue because it's going to be legendary, and they're still going to be talking about it 60 years from now. And, and they were just taking the piss. They thought, like, we're just kidding. You're going to throw this out. Obviously, everybody just throw this issue away. We're all going to lose our jobs in a couple months, and this is all going to be over. And they had no idea that it's like every single time they lie. Well, that's not true. Almost every single time when they would lie and say, hey, kids, buy 2 copies, this is going to be a major issue, it would turn out to be true. Like, even when they're like, hey, kids, major issue, we introduced Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan. Like, Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan are like billion-dollar IP right now. That's Jon Favreau and Gwyneth Paltrow. These are people with these are major movie stars. And then, but I'm sure at the time they were just kidding when they said this is going to be a major issue because it introduces Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts. But then occasionally you will get an issue where they're like, hey, everybody, this is a massive issue. The Porcupine is introduced. Although I was happy to see, I finally finished She-Hulk last week.
Yeah. And
I was very happy to see the Porcupine show up in She-Hulk with a very comics accurate costume.
Yes. Completely different personality and power set and everything, but very visually accurate.
they were there. Do you think that sometimes, though, them saying about that, picking up 2 issues, do you think that was just good marketing? Then people would pick up 2 issues because they thought that this was going to be the thing.
Maybe.
I don't know how much. I don't remember how much. I don't remember seeing very much saying, "Hey, buy 2 issues." Now, granted, you're reading scans where you might be seeing more of the marketing stuff and the letters pages and stuff than I am. But yeah. I think it's largely just Stan Lee developing his kind of carnival barker, larger than life personality, and trying to create this whole idea of this as being this kind of special clubhouse that everyone belongs to, and it's just it's just part of the personality that he was bringing to things, this bigger than life personality. And, part of that is, hey, these comics are bigger than life. These stories are bigger than life. These artists are bigger than life. These issues are bigger than life. And, he faked it till he made it.
Yeah. That's exactly it. It's the law of attraction, isn't it? This is going to be huge. You're going to want to keep 2 of these because this is going to be the best thing you've ever read in your life. And then people go, oh, okay, and then they just kind of do it and fake it till you make it. I agree. I remember watching a documentary on the early days of computer gaming, so in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, like with Atari and companies like that, and they were kind of, it sounded, you know what you just said, Matt, there, that they were just kind of dicking around, you know, Stan and Steve, and they were just having a, you know, and Jack were just having a bit of a laugh together as guys, and it sounds very much like that's what they was doing in this documentary that I was watching about computer gaming. You know, they were just having a great time, and you know, making this great stuff, and they kind of never knew it was going to blow up into this sort of computer game industry. But yeah, I think, again, just do what you love at the end of the day.
Well, and I don't, you know, I mean, to some extent, these guys didn't necessarily love what they did at all times. I mean, you know, there's the legendary and probably at least partially apocryphal story about, you know, that Stan Lee was just finally sick of, you know, working for his uncle or whatever it was, and, you know, editing comics, which was this very low prestige, embarrassing kind of job. And he was like, I was going to be a great novel writer. You know, it's like, I need to just get out of here and do what I'm going to do. And, you know, his wife, you know, once again, the way the story goes, his wife said, well, you know what, why don't you just try doing one of these the way you want to do it, rather than, you know, how you're told or how the formula says to do it. And that was Fantastic Four #1, and everything took off from there. Who knows how much that is true, and also who knows how much Jack Kirby was necessarily in on that attitude from day one, or whether he sort of warmed up to it over time. You know, so you never know. But, you know, one of the things I've said, once again, in terms of it being, you know, hey, they're just having fun. You know, this was a business, and you had to crank out either 12 or 6 issues a year, depending on if it was bi-monthly or monthly. And you had deadlines to meet, and they had to be distributed when they had to be distributed. And if you didn't have them out, that was, you know, you ended up taking a big financial hit from the contract you had. So they just, you know, they might come up with a fantastic idea and come out with this really great origin issue or this really great first issue of something. And then it's like, okay, next month, come on, let's go. What are we doing? And so it's my thesis that most Silver Age second issues are pretty bad. Because they haven't really figured out what they're doing with this thing yet. They just want to, you know, they're like, well, we got to get something out. So, and then they find their rhythm with it as they go on.
Yeah, like the first year of a lot of these comics is, you know, there's a lot of aliens, there's a lot of commies, there's a lot of, you know, aliens that turn out to be commies in disguise, commies that turn out to be aliens in disguise, and then they start to, you know, they start to break away from that. They start to figure it out a little better. Although it's interesting, you know, you would think that the comic that would be the biggest disaster from early Marvel Comics would be the Hulk, because it was the only one that got canceled. They had 6 issues of the Hulk, and then they canceled it after issue 6. Well, I love those first 6 issues of the Hulk, even though they have, you know, commies who turn out to be, no, they have aliens who turn out to be commies. They don't have any commies that turn out to be aliens. But they have, the fascinating thing about those first 6 issues of the Hulk is everything. You know, the thing I always loved about the Hulk growing up with the Mantlo years and the Peter David years was that Hulk was always the book that had no status quo, that was constantly changing. You know, oh, now the Hulk has Banner's consciousness. Now he's insane. Now he is stuck in a, you know, nexus of other dimensions. Now he is, you know, separated, and then he and Banner are different people. And every single thing that ever happened in the history of the Hulk happens in those first 6 issues of the Hulk. And, you know, they do Planet Hulk. They do, you know, he gets, the people of Earth decide to rocket him off into space. He does end up as a gladiator, although in a separate storyline. He does, you know, gain Bruce Banner's intelligence. He does do every single thing that ever happened is in those first 6 issues. And, you know, you were saying, like, did they know what they were building? I mean, obviously, if they'd known what they were building, the first thing they would have done is called lawyers. And they would have said, you know, hey, we're creating billion-dollar IP here. They're going to release 8 Spider-Man movies, and each one is going to make like an average of $1 billion. So let's get our lawyers on that right now and figure out what sort of rights we want to have going forward, which nobody did. And then they Jack finally called his lawyers in the 80s, and Steve never did. Steve was like, nope, I signed a contract. Ayn Rand says that we have to respect our contracts, so therefore I'm not going to try to renegotiate this. Jack was like, this is crazy. We have to renegotiate this, and it didn't. Everything ended up in tears. But obviously, if they had any idea how much value they were creating, everything would have gone down very differently.
And it's
But
snowballed
then-
so quickly recently, hasn't
But
it, as
then-
well? In the last 10, 15
absolutely.
years, it's snowballed astronomically.
Mhm.
But one of the, but the thing is, if they had gone and called their lawyers, and if they had known this was going to turn into billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar intellectual property, I don't think it would have turned out as well.
Yeah, it might not have done it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's a real catch-22 there. That I think the only reason it became as great as it is because there were no constraints on them, other than the Comics Code Authority. But it's just other than that, it's like this is, bottom. This is bottom of the barrel publishing here. And we're even a small company, a small disreputable company within this, small disreputable low dollar industry. And which is one thing that's really been interesting for me to figure out is just how how much of a small fish in the comics pond Marvel was back in these classic days. DC was just crushing them on sales. They were barely ever, other like Fantastic Four and maybe Spider-Man would show up in, the top 15 or 20 books or something like that. But other than that, they were all way down the list.
And I think they were gaining market share the whole time. And so
Yes.
that's where sort of their confidence came from. But yeah, when they originally started talking about how this is the Marvel Age of Comics, that was a joke. They were, especially once Batmania started, Batman sales exploded so much that Marvel sales looked really puny by comparison. And then, but eventually Batmania helped Marvel, I think, that, Marvel, a rising tide lifts all boats. But yeah, Marvel was not, Marvel was giving the impression that they were dominating, the market much sooner than they actually were. And it was really only when Batmania crashed that suddenly Marvel took the lead in sales, I think, sometime around 1969 or so.
Basically, the book The Secret was ripped off from them.
I was going to ask, like, what do you guys think made Marvel different at that time from, say, DC?
Oh, so many things. For
Like,
one
what?
thing, I'll tell you what the number one difference between Marvel and DC in the early 60s was. Marvel had credits. That's the thing. It's like people are like, oh, well, these early issues, Stan wasn't giving the artists enough credit. It's like, yeah, Stan wasn't giving the artists enough credit, but he was giving them credit. It's really weird. The only other comics reread podcast I listen to is a Legion of Superheroes comics reread podcast I listen to called The Legion Clubhouse, which I really enjoy. But the crazy thing is, like, all the Legion of Superheroes didn't start having credits in their issues until the early 70s. So I think that you read these Marvel comics, first and foremost, they have credits. Second is that they had continuity, which the DC books really did not. So if, we're in this weird period right now where Rick Jones is starring in different books in different parts of the country, which is very atypical. Like, we're starting with the next episode we're going to do, they're going to start telling Golden Age Captain America stories instead of Silver Age Captain America stories. And he's doing that partially because it was important to Stan that, like, I'm going to have the Avengers not be characters who were in other books because the continuity is too hard to keep track of. And I want to have everyone in the Avengers be people who aren't appearing in other books, or Captain America who is only appearing in Golden Age stories in his own book, because it's very important to me, except for Rick Jones, who is this bizarre exception, to keep track of the continuity of every character. And every time a character would show up in another book, it would be clear where that appearance happened in that character's other book. And DC was just not doing that. And I think that's where the $1 billion came from. I think that, Kevin Feige would have ultimately take this to an extreme. And Kevin Feige would go like, I'm going to take the number one value that Stan Lee created in this universe, and that is strong continuity, and turn it all into one big story. And Kevin Feige is like, Stan Lee did it gradually over the course of the 10 years he was writing the books. I'm going to do it in, well, I guess it also took him about 10 years, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to Stan had his 10 years in charge to create his massive story. I'm going to take my 10 years from whatever 2008 to 2018, and I'm going to turn this whole thing into the massive Infinity Saga of phases 1 through 3. And I think that was I think that was Stan Lee's number one innovation that made him different from what they were doing at DC.
Yeah, and personally, I and people go back and forth on how whether Stan Lee was a genius or Stan Lee was a thief or somewhere in between. But I think that one thing Stan Lee definitely did, and I don't think anyone can argue differently, is that he gave a common thread of, creative director, essentially. So even if you think he didn't really write much of anything except the actual dialogue after it was done, which in some cases you can make that argument, definitely. But he was a unifying force behind all this stuff, as opposed to, and they were all in New York. They were all in a real city and all in the same real city.
Yep.
As opposed to all the DC characters that were all siloed into their own imaginary cities that each had their own imaginary set of villains that rarely would appear anywhere else because they were in different cities. I think that's a huge part of it too.
So catching up here on the chat real quick, as a fan of both comics and film, I really appreciate the comic accuracy. Obviously, things you simply couldn't or shouldn't do, but I enjoy it for the most part. And I think that was more about the porcupine showing up in She-Hulk. And then this is spot on here. You mentioned the early days of DC and the early days of Marvel, and Marvel having continuity, DC not. There's a parallel today to the movies, right? DCEU and MCU. And hopefully we'll see the DCEU get things right with the new direction and studio leads and their new roadmap, but they're still playing catch up with what the MCU has done for, starting from 2008. So,
well,
so we had a comment here.
DCU can't even, get Captain Marvel together with Black Adam. They're like somehow we ended up with Captain Marvel and Black Adam movies that have different ratings. That basically an R-rated Black Adam movie and a G-rated Shazam movie. And it's like, if you can't even fit Black Adam and Captain Marvel, Shazam into the same movie, then you are splintered. You have a very splintered.
Alex, I think Alex has said that before, haven't you, Alex? You said something like that.
Yeah, it's so bothering that you have the first Shazam movie finish, and it's literally like, hey, who's that extra seat for?
Exactly.
And you're like, oh yeah, we know who that's supposed to be representing. That's supposed to be Black Adam. That's supposed to be who that is supposed to be hinting towards. But nothing. Come on.
I think what I quite liked, just a couple of observations just about what we said. As Jarian said, so many parallels between those early days of Marvel that you said that I think you were saying, Matt, they was using Rick Jones as this kind of glue that was sort of popping up everywhere. And they were doing that with a few characters, or have been doing that with a few characters in the MCU recently, haven't they? They started off doing that with Coulson or Nick Fury. And we've had, we've had other characters popping up more recently that are that kind of glue type character. But yeah, I think that whole sort of continuity thing is really what's helping Marvel now. And I think it's been said, a couple of our more notable members on our group have been saying that Marvel's at its best, or the MCU, sorry, is at its best when it shows its continuity.
Yeah.
I honestly feel like DC Comics do this a lot too, where they just kind of pick and choose things that they want and kind of run with it, and that's this is like an issue with DC across the board. It's not just like in one avenue, I would say, almost.
It sounds like those things have been bred from the very, very beginning, though. But based on what Matt and Steve have said, the continuity in Marvel seems to have been there since those early 60s, and that sort of separation in DC has been there since the beginning as well, and it's still repeating itself today.
But there was just a little bit in the early issues, like you would have different heroes encounter Atlantis and it would be a completely different thing in like 3 different books. So there was just a little sense beginning, like, are these going to be in the same universe? When Iron Man encounters Atlantis, is it going to be Submariner's Atlantis or a completely different Atlantis? And then by the time you're about 2 years in, they're like, nope, this is all the same. We're only going to have one Atlantis. We're only going to have one thing. And it takes them a little while to commit, and then they commit.
And it does seem like DCEU has gotten that one person who's kind of been across projects, and that's been Amanda Waller. Other than that, that's kind of it. She showed up in Black Adam, other projects, TV shows, but it seems like that's the only person they're having continuity with is her and nobody else right now.
Yeah, the thing about Amanda Waller is, I mean, I guess she would be too young, but I'm just thinking someone like what's her name, Gabourey Sidibe, or what's her name? Should have played her. I'm sorry, I had her name and then it suddenly lit it out of my head.
We butcher names all the time. It's okay.
Yeah.
Right. But it's part of the whole. One of the things I loved about Amanda Waller when I was growing up reading Suicide Squad, which that was around the time I was gravitating more towards DC stuff, was the fact that she was. I mean, she did not look like anybody else in the DC universe that you can see. Not at all. I mean, she looked like a lot of the people who a lot of the people who might be in my public school who had, power within that system and might not be paid attention to in everyday life, might not be respected in everyday life, but, she's got this presence, and within her world, she is not going to let Batman or anybody else take her. So I am. I mean, the actress who's playing her is.
Angela Bassett or no? Who is
No,
it?
it's not Angela Bassett. It's
I'm going blank now. Viola Davis. Thank you.
Viola Davis. Thank
yes.
you. And she does a great job with her. But I mean, I'm sorry. I want the wall.
You want a superintendent like person, like a school superintendent kind of feel.
Well, I mean,
What you described.
I yes, and I also I want her large. I mean, they refer to Amanda Waller as the Wall.
Yeah,
right.
true.
And it's both her personality and
Stature.
her physical presence.
Yeah. Almost like a Kingpin type character.
It's like in the Justice League animated series, she's built like a linebacker. Like she's she's huge. Like she's really broad. Like, and she's very threatening. She's got a threatening presence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I did ink Amanda Waller once or twice when I was working at DC. I did some checkmate stuff, and she showed up in a couple of those.
That's cool. That's cool. We touched on it a minute ago, or a little while ago, beginning of the show, about the some of the things that are just silly, but there's also a lot of the things in those older comics that we shouldn't really be, they won't translate well these days for other reasons. So not just because they're stupid, just because we don't treat women like that anymore. We don't, we know better now, and we've got better understanding of other cultures and things like that. Is it now going back and reading it in rereading as you are? I say knowing what we know now, but I suppose that is true. Being more open-minded now. Do you think, looking back on it, it was I don't know really where I wanted this conversation to go, but
I mean, yes, anything that you go to, any piece of popular culture you go to, that's usually, I mean, there's a rolling horizon at any given point where, probably 20 years before where you are, you're going to start finding some stuff that these days would be thought of as extremely problematic. So yes, going back 60 years or whatever it is now at this point, yeah, you're definitely going to find that. There are some really racist Asian caricatures that you've got in there. Although, actually, Mandarin is less racist in his portrayal in the comics than a lot of their generic Asian characters. Still kind of racist. Don't get me wrong, but less so, and less so than in a lot of the other comics industry. I mean, I know I was sort of beating this drum a little too much in some of the earlier issues, but at the same time that the Mandarin was being introduced, you had characters like Chop Chop over in Black Hawk, which is just the the original sort of yellow-faced caricature of an Asian person. And yes, there's absolutely that stuff there. And even when they're trying to be, kind of progressive with this stuff, whenever you're going out on a limb with that sort of stuff, you're on the edge at that point, and it is not going to age well. I mean, if things go in the direction that you, as that person who's trying to bring things, make culture progress along in a better direction, if it does, then the stuff you've done will almost by definition age terribly.
yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But it is shocking how, you have almost no black people in the early comics, and then you get Gabe Jones showing up in Sergeant Fury, who is, in some ways problematic, but not anywhere near as problematic as he could have been. And then, of course, in 1966, you have Black Panther show up, and really shockingly unproblematic to the degree to which, the later 2018 Black Panther movie was extremely faithful to the Lee Kirby vision of the character, and incorporated, thankfully, other things that Christopher Priest and Reginald Hudlin had introduced into the character. And thankfully there had been other black creators who had worked on that character and had added crucial elements to that character that then they could incorporate into the movie. But I would say, there ultimately was more of Lee and Kirby in that movie than there was of Christopher Priest or Reginald Hudlin. I would say that that they were able to, they were able to look at these comics. So, it's really shocking. But, certainly in terms of treatment of women, in terms of the women being underpowered and being taken hostage way too much, that's something we really reckon with a lot on our podcast. But also, you have a lot of Reed verbally abusing Sue and Hank verbally abusing Jan.
Yep.
And to a certain extent, that's fine, because it's like, okay, is this supposed to be, I don't think this is being presented as okay. I think that, this is being presented as something that is problematic, that is toxic. This is in many ways an intentional portrait of toxic masculinity, in the same way that we would admire today. Like, oh, good, this is a book that is aware of mistreatment of women and is calling it out. The problem is that occasionally you will get points in which Sue or Jan will say things like, oh, you're right. I am a silly little flibberty gibbet. I know that what you're saying is right. And it's like, oh, no, don't do it. It's fine. As long as we're not supposed to agree with Reed and Hank, and we're not, it's fine to show them as being toxic and to call it out, but never have Sue or Jan say, oh, that's fine. You're right. Because that is terrible.
I know that man is right, but I just can't admit it to him. There is stuff like that.
I think certainly with those two characters that you've just said there, and then there's also another one you could probably throw into the mix a little bit later on, and that's Charles Xavier.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
No, we sometimes have a running thing of who is the bigger dick, Charles Xavier or Reed
Richards,
like,
yeah.
Reed.
and I think we've been talking about that over the last sort of couple of years, since the sort of Disney Fox, acquisition thing, and just saying, oh, we're going to see a new Charles Xavier on screen. And we're saying about how Patrick Stewart was great, but he was so nice. He was like the nice old granddad that everybody just loved. And that's just not who Charles Xavier was, like, whatsoever. Like, he was a manipulative ass a lot of the time, but Reed also, so go back to Reed, and we're sort of talking about Reed, and I don't want to go down this side of the conversation, but somebody was saying about how Dev Patel could be a really good Reed Richards in MCU, and I was like, yeah, I agree. I think he'd be fantastic, because I think he could play that arrogant sort of scientist that sort of thinks he knows best all the time. And Hank's a little bit like that as well, isn't it? And those guys, those three in particular, they are like that as people. So I guess you need those people to realize how good sort of people like Captain America were, and the other guys. It's sort of there's that light and shade, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, I was really disappointed that one thing that disappointed me about Quantumania is that I had heard that William Jackson Harper, the actor who played Chidi on The Good Place, was going to be in Quantumania, and then he shows up in Quantumania as a random telepath who I don't know if that's even a character from the comics, but a random telepath who lives in Subatomica. And I was like, I assumed when I heard William Jackson Harper was going to be in Quantumania that he was going to be Reed Richards.
I did, yeah, same at first.
I thought that William Jackson Harper would make an amazing Reed Richards, because we saw not only was Chidi's character in The Good Place, he had elements of Reed Richards to him, but also he was really ripped. And there was that one episode of The Good Place where he takes off his shirt, and turns out he's in great shape. And I'm like, oh my God, they're going to cast William Jackson Harper as Reed Richards. That's going to be brilliant. And no, it was just some random psychic dude, and he only had a little bit of screen time. And I'm like, what a waste of William Jackson Harper.
It seemed like he was kind of a remix of the Micronauts leader a little bit. You could see that, but he wasn't necessarily tied to the Micronauts leader in the comics.
Yeah, I guess Commander Rand did sort of have psychic powers a little bit when he first appeared. I guess he was, because Marvel doesn't have the rights to Commander Rand, so obviously they couldn't use that name. But yeah, like Commander Rand's, I'm rereading those Micronauts comics right now, and he had the psychic link to Biotron and all that. Yeah, that's interesting. I wondered if we were going to get the Micronauts characters that Marvel does own, like Bug and I guess Marionette, maybe they own. I wondered if they were going to show up in this movie, but they didn't. I also wondered if Psycho Man was going to show up in this movie, but he didn't.
Yeah, when Janet said Subatomic, I was like, they're going to Psycho Man, but then they didn't touch on it again. And when she said that, I was like, are they going to have some kind of Fantastic Four tie-in later on? And then there was some stuff. Peyton Reed had some interviews. Not Peyton Reed. Jeff Loveness had interviews here with Charles Murphy, Murphy's Multiverse, and he was saying that Psycho Man was in the early drafts of the movie. So
really?
That's where the Subatomica kind of thing came from.
Okay. Yeah.
Question before we, 1 second. I know you can read that out. Question, just really quick one. You're saying you're rereading something now, Matt. Have you got all the physical copies, or do you reread it online?
No, I'm gonna, so let me say, I have a Marvel Unlimited subscription. I pay for everything I can possibly pay for. I give them every cent of mine that they can possibly take. However, when it comes time to actually reading things, I downloaded every Marvel comic ever in the early days of BitTorrent, back when there was no indication there was ever going to be anything like Marvel. And, it's...
So you've got your own Marvel Unlimited, basically.
Yeah, so I am Marvel Unlimited.
That's where our $10 a month is going. Your bank account. Your server.
So I own every Marvel comic ever, and I then load them onto my iPad and I read them.
So I presume that also means you have the ones that aren't going to appear in Marvel Unlimited because they don't have the rights. Things like, Shogun Warriors.
I have everything. Yes,
everything. Wow,
everything. Nice.
Can I ask how big that server has to be to hold all of that?
Let me double click on.
I was going to have a look.
Here.
He's actually got the numbers.
I've got the numbers. Let's see. It's 2.67 terabytes.
Wow.
Never imagined that. Yeah.
That's a
Now,
lot.
is that all your comics, or is that
That's
just
Marvel
ones?
and DC. So that's everybody.
Okay.
So
Okay. That's a little bit like the 4.5 days to watch all of South Park answer.
Yeah.
How big are all of Marvel Comics if you had them on file? 2.5 terabytes.
And
have you guys read Douglas Wolk's book? Have you read Douglas Wolk has written a new book called All of the Marvels, and in which he goes back and rereads every Marvel comic, and it's very good. We had him as a guest on our podcast. You should have him as a guest on your podcast. He is promiscuous in his podcast guest appearances. You should probably call him up and you can get him on. And he is the dude. He is the dude who actually read all. I just have the comics. I haven't read the comics. He's actually read the comics.
Right, okay. Let's cut you off now, and we'll go straight to him.
Yeah. Going back to the well, anyways, going to the chat here. There's an interesting comment. Actually, writing and publishing stuff like that speaks to how ingrained in the culture of society at the time. Talking about the toxic masculinity in the older comics and stuff. So, spot on there. And then going back to Charles Xavier, I thought James McAvoy did a better job of kind of showing the manipulator, kind of dickish side of Xavier in the later movies than Patrick Stewart did. They got the tone better, but it'd be interesting to see if they take that tone further, because Xavier is like a master manipulator behind the scenes, kind of that smiling face in your face, but doing stuff behind the scenes. So I wonder if they're going to give that tone, whoever they cast in the MCU, for him.
Yeah, sure. So we've got about 10 minutes left. What I'd like to sort of touch upon now is, I know you've said that there's stories that especially phase 1 to phase 3 in the MCU has relied heavily on those early days comics. Do you see it? So Fantastic Four, obviously this is happening soon, we know this in the MCU. Do you see, where do you having read that early stuff, having known that we've seen 2 origin stories already of the Fantastic Four on screen in the last sort of 20 years, do you guys think that we're going to go down that route again? Where do you think that they're going to get introduced to the MCU?
Matt, one thing this is reminding me of is you were talking about your I'm backwards here. There we go. You were talking about at one point your idea of how you would introduce a Fantastic Four movie years ago based on the 20th anniversary issue.
Yeah, so I've always said that the perfect Fantastic Four movie, the issue you should adapt, this is one case where I would not adapt a Stan and Jack comic. I would adapt Fantastic Four 236, where the Fantastic Four are living a normal suburban life and they don't remember ever being the Fantastic Four, and then eventually they realize that Dr. Doom and the Puppet Master have have created little robots of them that are living in this little robot town. But at night they just have dreams in which they're the Fantastic Four. And I'm like, I had this idea for a Fantastic Four movie long before there was an MCU. I had this idea for a Fantastic Four movie, I remember back in the year 1999. And I was like, because you could save so much money on budget, because the whole problem with the Fantastic Four movie at the time was like, you could not afford to have a character like the Thing who was going to be CGI for the whole movie. And I'm like, he's Ben Grimm for most of the movie, and he's just having dreams at night in which he's the Thing. And so I still say, even today, when we have much bigger budgets and much better CGI, that having the 20th anniversary of the Fantastic Four issue 236 be the basis of a Fantastic Four movie would be the ideal first Fantastic Four movie. But I am greatly looking forward to the MCU's Fantastic Four. I think that the tone was just way off in the previous Fox movies. And I think, it's interesting because the person who was supposed to make a Fantastic Four movie was Peyton Reed. And Peyton Reed was attached to that movie for so many years. And I think that he's done a good job on the Ant-Man movies. And I wonder if there was some thought of like, well, should we just have Peyton Reed go ahead and do it? Because he is in our stable and he's someone we can do. And obviously they've chosen not to do. Well, we don't know if they've chosen not to do that. Do they currently have a director attached?
Matt Shakman.
Okay, Matt Shakman.
Yep.
Okay. So, and at first it was John Watts, right?
Yep.
And then, but I saw there was a Peyton Reed movie not a lot of people saw called Down with Love. And
oh yeah, I saw that. I didn't know that was him.
That was Peyton Reed, and I saw Down with Love, and I'm like, I want to see this guy do a Fantastic Four movie in the style of Down with Love. I want to see a 60s style Fantastic Four, and I say I wanted it based on a John Byrne story, but John Byrne was very much doing 60s style Fantastic Four. And I would love to see, somebody at one point said, and I think this was Peyton Reed, that said the number one movie that would influence his Fantastic Four movie would be A Hard Day's Night. And that you would get the Fantastic Four as the idols of millions, as these very popular people who are always being chased down by their fan club in New York. And I'm like, oh, I'd love to see that movie. I would love to see a Richard Lester, and then of course Richard Lester made A Hard Day's Night, would later go on to make Superman 2, which is one of my favorite superhero movies, and Superman 3, which is not. But I would love to have seen Richard Lester's Fantastic Four. I would love to have seen Peyton Reed's Fantastic Four if it was going to be inspired by Richard Lester. But I totally trust the MCU to kill it with the new Fantastic Four movie. And Matt Shakman, he was the director for a lot of WandaVision, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I think WandaVision is my favorite my favorite aspect of my favorite product of MCU Phase 4 was WandaVision. So I think it's in good hands.
Which, if they do that in the style that you talked about, they could take elements of WandaVision.
I was going to say.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how WandaVision was. They could do that story just like that and take some of the elements that we saw in WandaVision to put in that Fantastic Four film where they're, the Pup Master is manipulating them. They're, they don't know who they are, the dreams. That could all be some of the elements pulled from WandaVision.
And then that would maybe explain where they've been all this time.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
Obviously, they're big fans of Hickman. I assume they're going to have a lot of Hickman elements in there. There's been rumors that they're going to have Valeria and Franklin Richards in there.
Yep.
And I think that's good. I think the Hickman run was good. I think one thing that Hickman really focused on is them as explorers, them as people who aren't really superheroes, who aren't fighting evil, who are explorers into odd worlds. And I feel like if they're going to do
Byrne
that,
did that a lot too. One of my favorite sub runs of his was the Negative Zone exploration storyline. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Going back. Sorry.
No, I totally agree, and I feel like that that I feel like if they're going to focus on them as explorers, they're waited too long, because if they're going to explore, I'm going to want them to discover Atlantis. Well, they went ahead and did Atlantis in Black Panther. I'm going to want them to discover Subatomica. Well, they just did Subatomica in Quantumania.
Yeah.
Like, they keep stepping on the
I
IP.
want them to
They
discover
keep
the scrolls. Oh
I want
wait,
them to
they've already done the
discover the
scrolls,
scrolls.
and
Yeah.
they discover the Kree, and they discover.
So one thing that I keep saying as an idea is that do a Lost in Space style movie with the Fantastic Four. They've already got their powers; they're out there lost somewhere. Reed is the actual villain, the maker type for the majority of the film before they come together in the end and then end up in present day. Now, one thing we have not discovered yet, or they haven't discovered yet in the MCU, is the negative zone. So they could go that negative zone route, Lost in Space, do all that kind of stuff, and then kind of get them out and they come into present day, or they find them through other means. So they could kind of do that way, but that's the one thing that they haven't explored yet in the MCU.
Yeah,
Like we were
Good
saying
point.
about
Well,
that
and
Reed
Limbo.
being,
Yep. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Good one.
we were
Yeah.
saying about Reed being the sort of hero and the villain of the movie, but by introducing the maker in there, that way it's all about him.
Yeah.
And it makes sense with the variant thing that they're going down now. Look, we're closing in on
quick.
that time. Yeah, go on. Yeah, go on.
So we got from the chat here about the culture and the writing, and here's an interesting comment, and I'll read both of them first. So there's two comments about this. On the flip side, there is now a power switch that feels undeserved and unearned in the comics, though. As a comics fan, let me put this up there. As a comics fan, it feels entirely uneven. So, what are your thoughts on that versus the writing back then to what they're referring to in the present time?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question.
Understand. Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
it's referring to the sort of the shift between males and females. Is that what do we think that's what it's talking about?
That could be it, or just the new generation of heroes, maybe. The changing out, like new Captain America. It could be even.
I think the most fascinating thing is going to be these next two Avengers movies, and everything has changed so much. They've spent so much time sort of trying to keep up with the much more diverse modern Marvel universe in Phase 4 that then it's good the Avengers are going to be unrecognizable in these movies. If presumably it's going to be all the Phase 4 characters showing up in an Avengers movie, the Phase 4 and 5 characters, and then how on earth are they going to cram all these characters into a movie together? I guess the Marvels will sort of be a dry run for the Avengers movies in terms of taking, these three very disparate characters from these two very disparate shows, and taking characters from WandaVision, Ms. Marvel, and the Captain Marvel movie, and trying to make them all work together is going to be a dry run for the Avengers. And but I think it, and then are we going to have? I guess, is Anthony Mackie's Captain America going to be like is he going to be like the leader of the new Avengers? I can't even imagine. It's going to be, I think they've got a big task in front of them, but I think it's going to be great. I think I would love to see She-Hulk kicking ass in the Avengers.
Well, I know Anthony Mackie has made some comments recently about, he has no powers, he's just a person, this kind of stuff. How could he possibly lead a team? But there's also talk out there is that we'll see an entirely new Avengers lineup that possibly will get defeated in the Kang Dynasty movie, that they are hinting at some deaths as well. So it will be interesting to see how they balance that with all these new characters. If we see any of the old characters brought back as part of Secret Wars, and how they'll handle that. But then going back to the chat here about the same tone and stuff, the same person, I'm all about a healthy mix, but often it feels like comics are starting to preach at us instead of being fun.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that it's been fascinating to see them in Phase 4 going like, okay, let's tack more in the direction of diversity, and and trying to do it without feeling like it's preachy, or without feeling like it's I think that you've had certainly Disney has been much more mired in culture wars than Marvel has, in terms of people really get offended when there's diversity in Disney movies, and Marvel has been offending people less with the diversity in Phase 4, which I think is great. And I think that Marvel has been sort of gently taking racist, sexist America's hand and very gently carrying them over the threshold into a more diverse universe.
That's a really
And,
nice way of putting it, actually.
Yeah.
And I think they've been doing a good job. I think Kevin Feige is a good guy, and he has been starting off with this, starting off with Stan Lee's very, very white male, straight, cis, hetero world, and then going like, okay, and now let's move on out. Let's go ahead and let's expand this a little bit. And I think it's
Move this into the
been
modern
good.
day.
Yeah, for sure. And while I'd love to sit here and talk about that, we could go on for another hour and talk about that kind of stuff. And in fact, actually,
Many
in a
more
few
hours.
weeks-
I'm sure.
many more hours. Yeah, many more hours. In fact, we've got an episode planned in the future where we're going to talk completely about it. We had a great guest on a few last year, actually. I think it was now. Sean Martinborough. And he was talking about diversity within comics and in the work that he does and things like that. And that was great. And we're going to hopefully have Sean back on to talk about that as a subject. So it might be great to have one or two of you guys back on to talk about that as well with your knowledge base that you've got. That would be really, really interesting. But sadly, we've run out of time today because I know that Steve's certainly got somewhere to be. Enjoy your show. But guys, before you go, where can we catch you? What's your podcast called? What's the books that you've done that you want people to go out and buy and support you with? Plug away.
Yeah, so our show, we should say the name of the show is Marvel Reread Club. So it's the Marvel, is it the Marvel Reread Club podcast or just Marvel Reread Club podcast?
The URL is marvelrereadclub.com. But yeah, So it's
go to marvelrereadclub.com and you can find our podcast there. You can also find me at Secrets of Story podcast. Here are my two books. The Secrets of Story, Innovative Tools for Perfecting Your Fiction and Captivating Readers. I should be holding them like this. And The Secrets of Character, Writing a Hero Anyone Will Love. And I try to bring that perspective to it. Yes, Steve, you have anything to add?
I didn't bring some of my latest collections down here to be able to show the things that are currently on sale. But the two most recent collections of some of my work I've done for DC, recently published, there's the Books of Magic Omnibus number 3 or 5 or something like that. It's a huge telephone book. It retails for like $125. That was the longest job I've had in comics before. And so we've got that entire run that I worked on in there with Rich Case, who was a childhood, an adolescent favorite of mine, who I then got to work with in the business, which was a dream come true. And then also the DC just came out with a Dwayne McDuffie sort of greatest hits trade paperback, and one of the pages I inked is actually one of the images that's on the cover of that. So it's got the final issue in his run of Firestorm that I worked on with Pop On as the pencil. So
excellent.
Other than that, I've done all sorts of stuff. You can find it in some places.
Brilliant. Look, guys, like we said, it's been a pleasure, and I know why that this happens quite often when we have really interesting guests in. We don't tend to have lots of comments and questions because they just shut up and listen, and that's exactly what's happened today. We've been told that before. We're kind of like, oh, the chat's been really. We sort of have a guest on, we go, yeah, you're going to get asked loads of questions, and then it's really quiet, and they don't ask any questions. And then the reason is people turn around, and they go, no, it's been really interesting. We just like listening, So you can take that as a compliment, the fact that we didn't have many questions because people just wanted to listen to you guys. But look, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on and speaking to us and sharing what you do, and it's been really interesting hearing more about that silver age of comics. It's not something that I'm overly familiar with, so it's really great to learn some stuff from you guys. Jari and Alex, either of you guys want anything to say closing wise?
Yeah, just I love the chat. Look forward to talking with you guys more. Thank you for coming on, and I'll definitely be listening to your podcast from the very first episode to kind of go through and listen to, because I do the same thing. I start a podcast, I start from the very beginning, listen all the way through. So
definitely, thank you guys for coming on. It was so great to have you guys to talk about the Silver Age.
Yeah, fantastic.
From the chat real quick, thank you for coming on today, guys. Had a great time. I did enjoy listening. Hope to see you back sometime. So that's from the audience.
Come back.
Definitely, we can arrange that. We can arrange that for sure.
Yeah, this has been tons of fun.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
been really great. Matt, Steve, thank you very much. Jara and Alex, as always, it's been a pleasure. Take care. See you next time.
Thank you.
Okay.
See
Bye,
you
guys.
guys.
Thanks for having us on.
Why don't you tell them about the time we faced
All right. Well, as I remember,
at Avenger headquarters